Hello everybody, my name is Kara, and today I'm going to talk about some authors who can sell me on just about anything. Well, specifically today I'm going to be talking about certain romantic tropes that are just not my favorite, that I don't like, and that can sometimes even push me over the edge into not reading a book if I see them in synopsis, but depending on the author, they can really work for me. The reason I find this so interesting is I feel like for those of us who are character-focused readers, obviously characters are the thing that we enjoy most in books, but I think even if you're more of a plot-focused reader, I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like characters are the things that tend to really stick with us, that tend to get us invested in a book or a series long term. Like you hear people talking about like characters and like relationships and things like that. I feel like those are the things that tend to get people like really excited and really like personally invested in stories. But again, I'm a character focused reader, so I'm probably biased. So to me it makes sense that characters are a very personal thing, that we would have these tropes and that they can really make or break a story for us. And I think with relationships, like friendships and romantic relationships and all of that, I think it's doubly so because we have very strong feelings about these characters, and so therefore we have very strong feelings about how they feel about or interact with each other. And for myself, I am very, very picky about romantic relationships in books. Like I have very strong feelings about what I like and don't like, but if one is done well, it can be my favorite part of a book. If it is not done well, it can mean that I don't enjoy the story at all. So all that to say, I feel like I have found some authors who I just like consistently can count on to deliver a romantic relationship that I enjoy. And definitely every book doesn't need a romance in it. I feel like we should have more books that don't have them, but if you're going to do one, I want it to be done well. So that's what we're here to talk about today. And I'm going to start with the author who actually like made me think of this, and that is Jane Austen. Because I was thinking the other day about how Persuasion is tied for my favorite novel of hers. Like I really, really love this book. I love the relationship in it. I love the characters in it. Just all around, it's a fantastic story. And I was thinking about how unusual that is because the primary romantic trope in this book is second chance romance, and that is one of my least favorite things to read. I have like no interest in second chance romance as a trope. I just don't find that as interesting for me personally because, as you guys probably can predict based on other romantic tropes I like, it's just not as interesting for me because what I like is the lead up and having the characters change and actually seeing them start to care about each other. So if I already know that they've been in love, it doesn't feel like as high of stakes to me, but Persuasion is the exception to that. And also I don't want to like imply that Jane Austen's books are solely romances because they're not. I get very frustrated when people treat them like they are, but because of the context of this video, that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So Persuasion was the one that made me think of that. And then it made me think like, it actually made me realize that several of Jane Austen's books have romantic tropes that I don't usually like, sometimes that are my least favorite. And so an example, Pride and Prejudice. I love the romance in Pride and Prejudice, and hate to love is definitely a thing I love. But I don't tend to like when there's a couple and one character falls in love with the other much before the other person. I don't like when it feels unequal like that. I like it to be at kind of roughly the same time, but I obviously still love Pride and Prejudice. And then another one that's really surprising is Emma, which is our current read, at least at the time of filming this. And this is kind of friends to lovers. So yeah, I just think that's really cool that Jane Austen, like I feel like that's an indication of yet another reason why I admire Jane Austen so much as an author, is she can sell me on things that I cannot stand, and I just love her for that. By the way, I don't really know how the structure of this video is going to go because it's not exactly a recommendations video, and it's not even really, like if I can come up with reasons why I think maybe like this author is one who works for me with this trope when a lot of authors don't, I will talk about it, but like honestly this is just something I thought was interesting, so hopefully you guys are interested too. As far as Jane Austen goes, I would guess that probably one of the reasons that her relationships always work for me is just that she's so good at writing relationships. Like she's so good at characters and character development and using tiny details to give you such a clear picture of a person, and also on tiny interactions between characters. I feel like that is one of the many places where she shines. So I would guess maybe that's the reason, but honestly, I don't know. Another author who I want to talk about is Anne-Marie McLemore. They're one of my favorite authors. I have talked multiple times about how much I love their books, but something that I have specifically noticed is they're another author who just consistently writes all kinds of relationships that I immediately buy into. Whether it is a romance or a friendship or any kind of other interaction, like I buy it because they are just so good at characterizing, and I think it's especially impressive because McLemore has a really gorgeous and flowery style, which is something that also, this is not like relevant to the video, but that's another thing that often doesn't work for me, but the way they do it just really clicks with me for some reason. So I think it's especially impressive that with such a poetic style, they're still so amazing at creating these deep relationships and developing these characters. None of that gets buried under the pretty writing, and I just find that really impressive. And the two books I specifically want to talk about, the first one is When the Moon Was Ours, and the tropes that this one has is this is a friends to lovers romance, and it's also kind of a like a pre-existing relationship a little bit. Like I think technically it doesn't start before the book, but it happens within the first few pages that the narration of the book kind of catches us up to the point where these two characters are starting to have romantic feelings for each other. So those are two things, again, that I really don't like, and yet I was just instantly so invested in Sam and Miel. Like I totally bought into their romance, I totally bought into their underlying friendship, like it was so good. I actually buddy read this with my friend Priscilla, and I think we both talked about how like much we enjoyed their relationship even though it had relatively little development from the beginning. Like just Macklemore is so good at building that into so few pages, and I just loved that. And then The Weight of Feathers is another one, and this book I actually put off reading for the longest time because I was so sure that I wouldn't enjoy the romance in it. And that's because this is like kind of Romeo and Juliet style, and this is a reason why Romeo and Juliet is also not my favorite Shakespeare play, although I am definitely appreciating it more and more. But just, I don't tend to like romances where the main impediment is completely exterior to the characters. Like I just don't find that as compelling, I guess, because again, I love characters, I love character development. I just find it a more interesting story if the development of their relationship is about not just the outside obstacles, but also the characters working through things and coming together on their own, kind of. So like anything that's kind of pitched as a Romeo and Juliet style romance, I tend not to be that interested in. And that's sort of how The Weight of Feathers was set up, or at least the way I think it was kind of marketed in the synopsis. And yet, I loved this book, and this is actually what convinced me, like, okay, I'm gonna love every single thing Macklemore writes ever, because if they can write a trope that I tend not to like very much at all, and make it such an emotional and beautiful story, and one that I think about all the time, like, I'm sold. I'm gonna love everything they write. So again, Macklemore just so good at characters and not letting the beautiful writing overtake the characters. But I think another reason why specifically this book worked for me too is even though it was sort of a feuding families setup, a lot of the relationship development was about how the two characters saw that anger between families and them realizing that they had misjudged the other group of people. So there was a lot of personal growth in addition to moving past these outside forces. Next I have Rosamund Hodge, and specifically I'm going to be talking about this short story collection of hers, which is Desires and Dreams and Powers, because actually in her full-length novels I have read, which I've only read 2 of her books so far, but she tends to write romantic tropes that I do enjoy and that would get me to pick up a book. She writes a lot of hate to love, which I obviously enjoy. But specifically with this collection, what I find really impressive is Rosamund Hodge is a writer who, for me, her specific way of writing romance is one that I just find, I don't want to say immediately believable, but like the way that she characterizes interactions between her characters, like I'm a little more forgiving of things I normally would probably be pickier about, and specifically in this short story collection, like these are short stories. All of these are pretty short page counts, and quite a few of these have some kind of romantic relationship. And I think it's a mark of how good Rosamund Hodge is at tapping into that fairy tale feeling, like that way she has of writing and creating atmosphere very easily, and the way that she can build a beautiful setting in something that doesn't like bog down the story. I think all of those things are kind of what lead me to be a little more forgiving of these very quickly developing romances. Because like, it's kind of like when you read a fairy tale, or at least when I read a fairy tale, I'm not really taking points off for insta-love or for like a very quick developing romance, because that's just something that happens in fairy tales. And I think Rosamund Hodge can really tap into that same feeling for me. So like when I read her short stories, it's like I buy that. Like there's one in particular I'm thinking of where they had like 1 or 2 interactions, and because of who the characters were and their backstories and how interesting their interactions were, and also because of Hodge's writing, I still found it very believable, and like I was already very invested in their relationship. Overall, I feel like Rosamund Hodge is a very, very hit or miss author. Like either her kinds of stories and her writing, they either really work for people or really don't. I am one of the people that they really work for. And finally, the last author I'm going to talk about today is Marissa Meyer, and specifically I'm going to talk about the Lunar Chronicle series, although technically Heartless might also qualify, because even though I had read and enjoyed a like kind of jester-centered romance before, I still wasn't sure how I felt about that as a trope, and she definitely won me over in Heartless. That was a book I really enjoyed. But as I've said before when I talked about Marissa Meyer, I feel like I'm kind of repeating myself with some of these, I'm realizing, but I just find her to be very, very good at creating compelling characters, really, really good at character relationships and interactions. The dynamics between her characters are so interesting, whether they are romantic or friendship or family or found family. I just think she's very good at that. I know some people really don't click with her writing, which I totally get. It just really works for me, again, with the characters and the relationships, and also how good she is at dialogue. I think that's another big thing. And I think all of those things that I like about her writing and her characters and the way that she builds her characters, I think those are all reflected in the romances in her books too, and in how deeply invested I was in all of the romances in the Lunar Chronicles series, because each book is a companion book and it follows a different main character and it has a different romance. Although, actually, one of the things I liked is that it wasn't like one romance developed per book. It would sometimes take multiple books for them to end up together. So I really like that. I know a lot of people really didn't like how many people got paired up, which I can understand that complaint, but I forgave it because I obviously really liked all of these characters and I really thought their relationships were done in a convincing way. So for example, Cinder, the romantic relationship in this book is like sort of borderline insta-love, which I didn't even notice until my friend Amy pointed it out when she was talking about the book, because she said how much she enjoyed it, even though it is kind of insta-lovey. And I had not even noticed that until that point, because I enjoyed this book so much. And of course I think of insta-love as something I can't stand, so the fact that I really enjoyed a book, you know, must mean that there's no insta-love in it, which is obviously not true. So that was something I really enjoyed. Although definitely their relationship does take a while to develop past that, but like the initial attraction and interest is much quicker than I tend to like. And then in Scarlet, which is book 2, this one is not so much a particular romance trope I don't normally like as like just a character dynamic that I don't tend to find as interesting. That's very hard to quantify, but basically like relationships that are similar to Scarlet and her love interest, those tend not to be ones that I enjoy. And I was still very, very invested in their romance in this book. And then even with Cress, which Cress and Thorn are my absolute favorite ship in this series. I love them so much. So even with this book and with this couple who I love, there were still quite a few tropes related to their relationship that I normally would not like. Like, again, this is one of those books where one character is interested in the other much before the other person is, like much before they reciprocate, which is not something I tend to like, but here I really liked it. There was also a little bit of a like fan and famous person kind of romance, just a little bit of that, which is another thing I tend really to dislike. So yeah, this is my favorite couple, and even with that one there were a few things that should have turned me off, but Marissa Meyer is just so good at convincing me. And then with Winter as well, I was not sure about how I would feel about Winter's romance because it was kind of a like Princess and the Guard situation, which is a trope that I don't think I had enough experience with to know how I felt about it. It felt a little bit like Friends to Lovers, which again is something I don't tend to like. So the fact that I loved it so much in here, it's like just, I think Marissa Meyer has cemented herself for me as just an author who I can always count on, like these others, an author who I can always count on to sell me on character relationships and on characters themselves and on romances and just like anything related to character stuff. I trust all of these authors pretty much implicitly at this point. Okay, everybody, so those were some authors who are just very good at getting me to like things I normally don't like. I don't really know how this video turned out, like what it's gonna really be, because it's not exactly a recommendations video. It is kind of a favorite authors video. But it's just more about something that I find personally very interesting. So hopefully you guys found it interesting too. Please let me know if you guys have any authors that are kind of like this for you. It doesn't have to be for romantic tropes, but are there any tropes where you just really don't like them, you never pick them up or seek them out, but there are certain authors that can just sell you on anything? I would love to hear that. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!